Well, welcome to Nuts and Bolts of New Venture. My name is Joe Hadzima. I'm going to be your guide on 6 sessions that are going to try to go through a lot of the practical things you need to know about in starting a new venture. Tonight, I'm going to introduce you in the first part of the session. Each session is going to have 2 parts, separated by a break period in the middle, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's to encourage team formation. There have been a lot of companies actually formed out of people who've come and taken nuts and bolts. So let's start off and figure out why you're here on this beautiful evening in Cambridge. Temperature above 20 degrees Fahrenheit? Okay. Well, maybe you don't know anything about entrepreneurship and you want to understand what it's about. We have every year some people who have heard about it, they don't know anything, they just want to put their toe in the water. So maybe that's why you're here. Maybe you see something that sucks and you want to make it better. That's a quote from Drew Houston, who one year was in New York over Thanksgiving vacation and was coming back on the bus and he couldn't get his files that he wanted to work on. And he said, you know, it really sucks what's out there. And I said, well, you know, these are cloud services. I mean, there are plenty. There's Google Drive, there's Box. He says, yeah, but they all suck. And he went and formed a company called Dropbox. So maybe you see something that sucks and you want to do something about it. Maybe you have an idea or an invention and you really want to change the world in some way. That's really a major motivator of real entrepreneurs, is something that's really important that you want to change. You see a way to make the world better. Or maybe you think it's glamorous and you can make a lot of money. Yeah? How many people vote for that? Oh, good. Very interesting crowd. So many questions you need to answer if you're going to do this. First of all, how do I start? What do I actually do, right? Okay, what about, okay, I got a problem. I'm going to solve something. What is the problem, the real problem that I think I'm solving? How does my solution solve that problem? I mean, will it actually solve it or make a little bit of a dent in it? And by the way, who cares? Who cares about your idea? Specifically, who cares? Who is your customer? Customer is somebody who's going to actually pay you in the traditional models. Bob Jones, in the second part of tonight, is going to talk to you a little bit about customers. There's Bob. And more important, you know, how do you find these people? How do you make money so you can have a sustainable venture and not just a one-off project? This is the business or venture model. We'll have that on one of our sessions. How do you make money? How do you make it sustainable? What will it take to bring the solution to market? What's it going to cost? What resources do I need? Money, people, connections? Will I need some sort of entity to set it up so I can attract investors and others? And what would that be? Maybe a corporation or a limited liability company, something like that? How do I keep people from stealing my ideas? You can lock them up. You know, I was watching a panel in the IT space, and there was a chief information officer and a chief security officer. And it was interesting on the same panel. The chief security officer says, I'm happy when nobody can get anything. And the chief information officer says, but I need to have everybody get something. So that conflict between keeping it safe and making it available. Well, I need co-founders. And what will be our relationship with each other and the entity? You know, the myth of the sole inventor sitting in the attic making something major to market is really a myth. Most successful ventures have teams. And so whether that's a co-founder or other team members, you have to figure out what that relationship's going to be. Do I need a founder's agreement? What is that and what should it cover? We'll talk a bit about that. How will I negotiate with employees, consultants, investors, strategic partners? How do you do that? How do I figure out what I don't know? That's a real key one. It's a story of the guy who steps off a cliff, and as he's going down, someone says, "How's it going?" And he says, "So far, so good." Right? How do I figure out what I don't know? What are the potholes in the road that may come up, and how do I recognize them and avoid them? It's all right to make a mistake once. To make the same mistake twice, that's a problem. The problem with new ventures, and it's happened to me, they don't come in the same clothing. I've been in something and all of a sudden I go, "Oh, I've been here before. I should have seen that coming. I got burned before that way." So at least knowing that there are potholes there is part of the battle. So there are a lot of moving pieces. And why should you do this? What's the reward? Well, maybe for some it's fame or fortune. Certainly seems glamorous, and certainly these people have done a lot of amazing things and made a good deal of money on the way. And as my son once said, he wanted to grow up to be a philanthropist. I said, "That's not a job. That's what you do after you get the money." So he's working on that. But the reality, Jensen Huang, NVIDIA, you've probably heard of them. Article in the Wall Street Journal. Sorry for those who saw it was behind a paywall. It's sort of hard to, if you tried to read the article. I think his quote is great. "If we realize the pain and suffering and how vulnerable you're going to feel, the challenges you're going to endure, the embarrassment and the shame, and the list of all the things that could go wrong," he said, "nobody in their right mind would do it." His company is worth over $1 trillion in market cap. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, we got an audience full of people who want to do this. I think we've got a bunch of crazy people here. Interesting. Okay. So the other reality, only about 10% of companies succeed. 10%. Now, can you think of any other place where 10% would be a hit? I'm not a salesperson, but salespeople tell me, if I get rejected 9 times and I make the sale on the 10th one, that's a great day. That's really perverse. It's not for me. But 10%. In the first 5 years, 62% of the companies that fail in the first 5 years, 62% say it's lack of preparation. Here's some other failure reasons. 95% fail to meet projected projections. 80% fail to see the expected return. 40% liquidate. The key thing here is 99% fail because of the lack of planning and experience. That's pretty clear. Well, maybe everything isn't all that dismal. We're here at MIT. The Kauffman Foundation for Entrepreneurship did a report in 2009. It's been updated since then. At the time, 25,800 companies had been founded by MIT alums out of a living population of 120,000, so maybe a small portion. If you put them all together, they employed about 3.3 million people at the time. Their annual revenue was $2 trillion. And if you put them together as a single geographic political entity, it would be the 11th largest economy in the world. So maybe there's something here that we're doing right. Well, not sure. So why this course? Well, it's not about theory, it's really about doing. As I'll explain about who our presenters are. It's also about planning and executing new ventures. It's not just businesses. And that's why we have, in the people that showed interest in the course, everything from social developmental entrepreneurship, developing country entrepreneurship. So it can be nonprofit. One year we had the US Mint, the people that make coins and stuff, show up because they were interested in figuring out how to launch a new venture. So it's really an eclectic group. Our goal is to increase your probability. So you're in the 10% that do succeed. But I have to warn you, there's an entrepreneurial virus. And if you catch it, you end up with a lifetime incurable disease. Yep. The good news is it's not fatal. It is highly contagious and transforming, but it is a disease. It's a perverse state of the world once you get into it. It's not for everyone. The other thing it's important to note, it's a full contact sport. If you're into a company, you're going to be starting a company or joining a startup. It's every day, it's constant. There's no, slacking off on things. That's why many people say, what are the benefits of starting a company after I've been at MIT? I said, well, you'll probably think it isn't that much harder than it was when it was here, because you're working probably the same number of hours. Okay, so what will you get if you decide to stay around for the course? We're going to have 6 evenings, a total of 18 hours. And you'll get new or enhanced skills in a lot of areas. How do you evaluate a venture idea from an impact and economic viewpoint? Now, this is for you if you're thinking about a venture. I've got an idea. How do I evaluate it? Or maybe you're going to join a team, a startup. Or maybe at some point in your life you make enough money that you're going to think about investing in a startup. How do you evaluate it? How do you figure out who your customer is? That's the real key thing. Who wants what I have? Where do I get financial resources for the venture? And it's not always venture capital. I think there's a bias for people, especially around high tech, is venture is the only money. We'll talk about other places to get financial resources. How do I scale the venture and make it sustainable? If you're going to put all this time and effort into it, presumably you want to make sure that it's going to grow and do the kind of things you want and be sustainable. How do I build and retain a top-notch team? Not only the people that work with you, but the people you surround yourself with. You're sort of known by the company you keep. How do you keep them motivated? How do you negotiate deals and resolve team conflicts? There will be conflict. If there isn't conflict, you're not pushing the boundaries far enough. The question is, can you resolve them? What are the legal pitfalls that you should know? And there are plenty of things that can trip you up. We'll go over a bunch of them. How do I pitch my venture idea? And Bob Jones will be back to talk about that. It's not only pitching it to people who are going to give you financial resources, but people who are going to give their time to you to join the team. How do you explain what you're doing and get them on board? So, a lot of moving pieces. As you go through the course and as you think about ventures, there's always the personal side of it that you need to think about. These are all things I've talked about are sort of factual things. How do I find this? How do I do? What does this mean to you? Do you really want to do this? Think about it as you go through the course. Should I do it? Is this something that I really feel passionate about? What's the most scarce resource that you think you have? Time. Somebody said time. Yeah, it's your time. If you launch off on a venture and you haven't figured it out, you're going to spend 2 to 10 years of your life if you really want to push it through that. Is this something you're really prepared to do? And why are you doing it? Again, a whole bunch of questions. You may not know the answer now, and it may change over time. You may have a significant other. The journey is not you alone. There's the people around you. How do your personal relationships happen and continue? And should you do this now or later? I mentioned to some people at lunch today, one year we had a accepted student week, and where new students come and get to see what's going on, and they showed up at a little talk I was asked to give. And I went and got set up, and there were people in the audience well before they normally should have been there, and I got to talking, and they were high school students who were come to campus to see, did we really want to go to MIT? They'd been accepted. So I gave a little talk, and afterwards the people were asking questions, and this one high school senior said, I've got this idea, I think it's great. And he started to tell me, I said, well, don't tell me the idea quite yet. And he said, I've got a venture capitalist as a neighbor who wants to fund me and start a company. Should I do that? And I'm looking, and his parents were behind him, going, oof. And I'm thinking, what am I going to say? So I said, do you think this is the only good idea you're ever going to have? And he thought for a moment. He said, no. I said, well, you might think of coming here and learning more so that you can execute on those ideas better. His parents in the background are going, whew. And then they thought, ooh, I got to write those checks. So anyway, so now or later, when's the right time? And is it for you? Okay, so here's tonight's plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about who you are, and then I'm going to introduce our teaching team, and then I'm going to give you a new overview of new ventures, sort of a set of guideposts for the journey. And then we'll do a break for team building, and I'll explain that. And then Bob Jones will come and start to answer those questions of who's a customer? So, who are you? You probably know individually, but collectively, we have students. We have undergraduates, grad students, and postdocs in engineering, science, architecture, planning, management, economics, education, law, public health, and I probably missed somebody. We have non-student participants. We have alums, faculty, staff. There's some company founders. So we have everybody from one person said, I've never done anything entrepreneurial, I want to find out about it. And another person said on the sign-up sheet, I've done 2 ventures and I want to come back and figure out how to do it better next time. So quite a range. We have mentors. I think we have a couple of mentors from the Venture Mentoring Service at MIT. And we have others. I'll come back to that. We have organizations, of course, MIT. But we have people from Babson, BU, Columbia, Georgia Tech. There's a big contingent from Harvard, Stanford, Wellesley, and Yale. We have some foreign universities. They're remote viewing from Germany and Greece. And we actually have some students who came from Taiwan, from National Taiwan University, who are here today. They must have heard the weather was better than they found it to be. And we have companies. We have some people who started companies, and we have typically larger companies where people are either thinking, I might spin out, I'm tired of this big company thing, or they're looking around for innovation ideas going forward. When you signed up, you were asked to indicate your areas of interest, and here's a list of them. If you do the math, you realize there's probably more there than are the number of people in the audience. But it's quite a range, everything from education to developing world problems to AI. Okay, so how do we deal with the fact that we've got this big range of stuff and we have 18 hours, 6 sessions. Well, we are MIT, so we have to put up an equation. Okay. Do we have any Sloan business people in the audience? Okay. All right. For the Sloan people, H is happiness. Okay. We've got all these people with all these different interests in different areas, different stages of development, different parts of their journey, and you're going to be sitting here, and how do we make you all happy? So for the business students, we have R divided by E. What is R and what is E? Anybody? Whoa, this is... Well, in the past, what the business students have said, R is revenue and E is expenses. Right? So if the revenue is high and the expenses are low, you are very happy because you're making a lot of money. And that's maybe a subset of what this is. Can you think of a broader concept of what R and E might be to make you happy? Yeah.
Be results over expectations.
Okay, results over expectations or reality over expectations, right? So, great. So the reality, actually, I originally had this as R minus E just to be a little wonky. And my wife, who was a math and economics major, said, no, it's got to be a ratio. So I had to change it. So reality is we have 18 hours. And expectations are all over the place. So the only way I'm going to make you happy is if you lower your expectations. Take this as your first step in a journey. And if I can really convince you to lower your expectations to 0, you're going to be infinitely happy, okay? So H equals R divided by E. It's actually a universal concept. If you over-promise and under-deliver, that's unhappy. If you over-deliver, when you promise something, people are happy. Reality is better than expectations. So yeah, keep a thought about that. So who are we? Well, highly unpaid volunteers, speakers. In each case, they have done, and most of them right now are doing what they're going to be talking to you about. We're not coordinated, with except very small exceptions. We haven't coordinated the presentations. They're going to tell you what their experiences have been. And this is sort of surprising because it was maybe 10 years into the course, and I said, you know, we ought to get these people together. And they'd never met each other. And it was quite alluring as they started to talk about things. So maybe that was coordination a few years ago. But if you listen carefully, you're going to see patterns in what they talk about. You'll see a consistent pattern. And because they're telling you about practical things, this is going to save you time, money, and probably a lot of personal grief. So that's partly the strength of the course. And the question is, why do we do this? Well, part of it has to do with the course history. You know, this was not some concept that somebody said we should do this course from on top. I was part of doing some courses on a thing called the manager's legal function. It was about, you know, how do managers deal with law stuff. And some students came up and said, you know, you're very practical. Could you do something during IAP, during the January session, about how to start a company? Well, it's interesting. I said, well, let me think about it. This was back before we had the internet, believe it or not. And so I got busy doing other things. And they called me up one day and they said, well, we put it in the IAP catalog, and we dare you not to show up. Excuse me? You put it in the catalog? Yeah, we figured, you know, like 4 nights maybe. Could you do 4 nights? First of all, I was thinking, what? The audacity. And then I started to think, wait a second. They think I can give them something that they want. That's a customer. I got customers. I don't know what I'm selling yet, but I got customers. So I picked up the phone and I called. I said, okay, 4 nights. It was 3 hours, so we'll do like 2 sessions a night. We'll have 8 sessions. So what are the 8 areas that I think somebody ought to know about if they're starting a company? I picked up the phone and I said, can you talk about marketing? And it would be somebody that I had heard, and I knew that they knew about it and they were actually entertaining. But then I ran out of people that I knew, and I would call people up and I'd say, well, that I had heard them present. I would say, can you recommend somebody who would do this? And if you do, they have to know something and they have to be entertaining. You're going to vouch for them. So they all showed up. I only knew 3 of the first 8. And as I'm thinking, oh God, now we've got all these people. It's in the evening because it was after work for them. What if there are only 5 students in the audience? And we got all these people coming. So I better pack the audience. So I started calling around. We posted things on the walls. And we were in 6120, which is a smaller room. And thank God the whole place was packed. People were sitting in the aisles. I thought the fire marshal was going to come. And we just said, let's go. And it turned out to be fantastic. And I realized, if I tried to plan this out in detail, I would have screwed it up. What I had done is sort of an entrepreneurial lesson. First of all, I had a customer, which was great, necessary. But what I did is I said, here's the goal. Here's the resources you have, which is nothing but this time. I said to him, I don't want you to spend a lot of the presenters. I don't want you to spend a lot of time writing up stuff and doing it. Just think of maybe the 3 or 4, 5 things that you wish somebody had told you about whatever you're talking about when you were young. And then we'll just do Q&A. And it worked just fantastic. So I gave them a mission, I picked the right people, and then I did the most important thing. I got out of the way. And this is how we get to today. The other thing is impact. Versions of this course have been seen by over 1 million people between coming to the class and OpenCourseWare. And we throw a lot of stuff at you. The thing that really keeps all of the presenters coming back is 3, 4, 5, 10 years later, we'll get an email saying, I remembered something you said about this. And you sort of figure, well, for every person that took the time to do that, there might be others. So if we're having an impact, if we're helping, we can't tell you how to succeed, but we can tell you the things that could screw you up, right? And if we can reduce the probability that you're going to encounter those things or that you'll know what to deal with it, then we've increased your probability of success. So that's sort of what keeps us coming back. Okay, who are we? This is me. This is a picture when I was slightly younger. I was a partner in a law firm. I was a founding judge at the 100K competition, which started out as 10K. I was global chairman of the MIT Enterprise Forum, which had chapters all over the world. I've been involved in a whole bunch of companies as either a founder, employee, investor, board member, advisor. Right now, I have 2 basic companies that I'm co-founded working on. One is IP Vision, which does intellectual property analysis. We'll see a little bit of that when I talk about the legal things later in the week. And Neurosyn Technologies, which is doing non-invasive neurostimulation. But more important than I am in this are our teaching assistants, because you'll have to deal with them. We have Taylor Brown, who's over there. Taylor? Okay. She's a CPA, so if you need help in those financial projections, I'm sure she'll tell you where to go. Sloan, 2027 MBA candidate, was at Ernst & Young doing AI enabled finance things. Color Wave Fellow, and has a summa cum laude in accounting from La Jolla Marymount. You'll see her further thing on LinkedIn. And we have our second TA, Eric Ushao. Hands. I didn't meet Eric in person until this afternoon. We'd all been on Zoom, and he's taller than I thought. He's also an MBA candidate, worked with a healthcare startup, and also a consultancy in life sciences. He's a finance lead of the 100K, so he'll have a collection box on the way out, I think. And he's biomedical engineering and economics from Yale. So very important people to know in the context of the course, and thank you very much. I think you guys are the only ones who actually get paid, but it's not very much, is it? So, okay, so tonight, new ventures overview. So I'm going to go through a bunch of things you can think of as sort of guideposts for this journey. And I've tried to bring them up to a high level, and we'll dive down into them during the individual sessions. So I'll make it very simple for all of you. It all seems complex, but it's really very simple, regardless of the nature of the business. There are only two things you need to do. The first is you have to create value. If you don't create value, you have nothing. Okay? But there's more than that. The question is, who do you create value for? How much value? How often do you do it? What does it cost to create the value? All of that, but you have to create value. The second thing is, if you create value, you got to figure out how to capture some of it, harvest it, so you can do it again. If we're a for-profit venture, it's called profit, cash flow. If you're a not-for-profit, it's figuring out how to make it sustainable through other sources. But you have to capture some of the value. If you don't do that, you're not going to have a sustainable venture. And that's the business model, venture model we'll talk about later on. Now, actually, here's the issue. The questions are really easy. And we're going to, over the course of the sessions, we're going to have you understand what the question should be, and you'll get very good at asking those questions. The answers are always hard, though, because for the kind of things you're doing as a new venture, if the answers were easy, everyone would be doing it. And that isn't really what entrepreneurs do. They're doing stuff, in most cases, that nobody else had done, or nobody else did in the same way. So the answers are never easy. But understanding what the questions are help you figure out what the answers might be and the process for trying to resolve that. Okay, so think about that. Two concepts: create value and capture some of it. Another way to think about looking at ventures and everything, and this is based on when I've looked at thousands of ventures, either as a potential investor or joining them or ideas, it sort of boils down, in my mind, to the three whys. Okay? Three basic concepts. And you should keep this in mind. We're going to talk about how to pitch a venture and everything, but you need to be answering these kind of questions. So the first question, first why is, why this? Why this? Why is this idea worth pursuing? Why? Could it be the size of the market, or the importance of the problem? Why this? I could do a whole bunch of things. Why this? Amy Smith entered the 100K with an idea. Amy, I'm going to explain that in a moment. She went on later to head up the development lab at the Edgerton Center. Later was awarded a MacArthur Genius Prize. So obviously, very accomplished person. She stood up in front of the judges and said, I can almost hear the pitch in my head. It was something like this: 1.9 billion people on the planet don't have access to clean water. I looked it up the other day. It's probably more like 2.4 billion at this point. Really, that's a big problem. I'm thinking, the only way to test for contamination of water is using an incubator today. Oh, okay. The 1.9 billion people that don't have access to clean water, most of them don't have electricity. I've got an incubator that doesn't require electricity. Are you interested in hearing more? Big problem. Why this? Yeah, that's, okay, so that's big. Second is, why now? All right, it's a big problem. We have a lot of problems out there. Why this idea now for this problem? It could be the convergence of opportunity and solution. So another example from the 100K competition. One year, a very talented team got up and talked about a new innovative way to track air traffic control, do air traffic control. I mean, it was great. They could do this out. People were very impressed. But they didn't get invited to the next round of the competition. And afterwards, one of them came up to me and said, well, why did the judges not like our idea? I said, well, actually, they did like your idea. Then what's the problem? Well, the problem is it's not feasible. You can't do this. You have to change the whole air traffic control system, which is, we didn't think it was feasible. And I remember the person looked at me and said, well, didn't you know that the FAA has put out a request for proposal to change the air traffic control system? No, you never told me. So at that time, the idea that they had was the right time to do it, because there was a change that was happening and they had the solution. The two converged. It could also be that maybe now, and I'll give some examples later, maybe the technology is at a point or other things have happened that make it possible to do it now, where it wouldn't have been a year ago. Okay? So why this? Why now? Why this team? Why do I think these people are the right people to do it? You know, often we think of innovation as being revolutionary, just totally out of the blue. And that happens quite a lot. But more often it's evolutionary. And so the mistake is to think you're the only smart person with an idea. There may be other people. And so if you're talking to people that are interested in this stuff, be it an investor or maybe a company looking to do strategic things, you have to say, why is this team? Why do I think these people can do it? Now, it might be there's prior experience. And it might be because there's a compelling venture model. 1 year on the prior experience is not always a guarantee. There was a computer company back in the mini computer days here called Encore Computer. Encore meaning again. And its founders consisted of Gordon Bell, who had designed the digital thing, the founder of Prime Computer. There were three icons of the computer industry that got together to found this new company. And if anyone knew, had the experience, it would have been these three. It was a total mess. We'll come back to people issues. But prior experience out of the box would say, these people are the ones that I think could do it. Now, those are the three whys. Why this? Why now? Why those people? Then you get to the fourth why. Why won't this work? Right? Now in sales, the people that I know who are in sales say, when you start to get questions about why won't it work, you've sort of got them hooked on the concept. Otherwise, they wouldn't take the time to ask you the questions. So when you're evaluating a venture or people are evaluating you, the question is, what could possibly go wrong? Well, if you think it through, there are things that you know could possibly go wrong, and you better have thought about what would I do if that happened. So being able to have in your mind a contingency plan, because you're going to be investing a lot of your time and effort. So the fourth one is, why won't this work? Okay, does it make sense? Okay. Okay, I'm going to shift a little bit. I'm going to go through, I went mentally through a bunch of things I've been involved with, and I thought, could I distill some lessons that might provide a framework for you to think about as you go through this journey in the next 6 times. And I think I came up with 4 components for success. The first is you have to have an idea. You have to be able to execute on the idea. The timing has to be right. And you got to have the right people. And if you get all together, that's the sweet spot, which is not inconsistent with my 10% thing at the beginning, right? hopefully bigger than that, but I couldn't get the Venn diagram to work. I'm not too good with graphics, as you'll see later. All right, so let's go through those. Ideas. Ideas are a dime a dozen. If you're at a place like MIT, you can't, every 10 feet there's an idea down the hall. I mean, the place is full of ideas. So the question is, what makes an idea valuable? It's got to be valuable to someone. And we keep harping on this idea of who's the customer, who values what you've done. How much value is the idea? How much, is it a big idea? Could it be a small idea or a big idea as part of success? And the other things underneath that, what does it cost to produce and deliver? And how will I capture it? Okay, those are the idea things. And then, is it easily copied? If I got a great idea and anyone can do it, do I really want to spend the time, doing it? There was a while there in the internet bubble where the idea was being a first mover. First mover is one. Get out there, doesn't matter, just move fast. Well, that works in certain industries at certain times. But it's not as easy, if it's easily copied, it can be a problem. That's ideas. What about execution? Vision without execution is hallucination. This guy was not known for doing anything important, Thomas Edison. Now I can talk about a few examples of deals I passed on being involved with, or funding or advising because of execution issues. The first was Zipcar. You familiar with Zipcar? Zipcar was, the idea was you could rent a car for an hour and just sort of pick it up off the street and return it. Now, I got to admit, you're always a creature of your past history and where you are. So I'm sitting here in Cambridge, where the sort of joke is when you're recruiting a new faculty member, you say to the faculty member recruit, we could offer you tenure, the Nobel Prize, or parking. And the smart one would say, I'll take parking, because if I can park, I can get to work, and I can then show you that I'm good enough to get tenure, and if I'm really good, I'll get the Nobel Prize. Okay. By the way, footnote, my daughter did an MBA and a JD at Berkeley in California, and I went to visit her. I stayed at the faculty club there, and conspicuous are the parking places reserved for Nobel Prize winners. So Berkeley's got it figured out. All right. So I'm looking at Zipcar and I say, I love the concept. Just go to the rental thing and stand in line and everything. Go, tap on it, pick it up. But they've got to go find parking spaces they can allocate in Cambridge. How's that going to work? And then you got to do that in every single city. Ugh. I mean, I love the concept, but execution. Well, it turned out they did go and they grew. I think they actually did go public at one point. At the end of the day, and they made a major change in the way people think about urban transportation. Now we have bikes that you can do, and Uber was not around back in those days. But it made a major change from when it was either you walk or you drive. But the founders themselves, at the end of the day, I don't think had much of the company after a lot of effort. But that might be all right if that's their vision was, I want to change transportation. Another example of something that I sort of passed on was an eBay precursor. This was before eBay was around, and I saw this plan, and people came in and they were all enthusiastic about it. And I stopped and I thought, okay, let me see. You want me to buy something sight unseen from somebody I've never met and nobody's standing behind the transaction. Well, if you put it that way, it sounds like mail fraud to me. So I passed on that. So it be. I mean, those are the things they had to overcome. I mean, first of all, we'll talk in a moment about two-sided models, and the way they went about it made sense. But from an execution viewpoint, thinking about it, that to me was not a one to spend time or money on. So sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. Now, MIT ecosystem is really about the first two things, ideas plus execution. This is the MIT seal, mens et manus, mind and hands. It's right there in the seal. So that's where we are. But let's move on to the next thing. Oh, listen, these two are necessary but not sufficient. Timing. This is a quote from somebody you're going to get to know. I've lost more money and time being ahead of the curve. The famous philosopher, Joe Hadzima. But here's the point. It can take a long time to be an overnight success. 3D printing, 25 years plus. I was at an investor conference a few years ago when 3D printing was just getting a lot of press, and somebody came up and said, "You're at MIT, right? Yeah, tell me about this new 3D printing." I said, "It's not new. It's been around. The original patents have expired." "Well, what's going on?" I said, "Well, because there have been advances in materials and other things that have made it possible to do something other than little plastic toys. It took a long time for that to get there." On our last night, we're going to have Marina Hatzopoulos, who was one of the co-founders of one of the first 3D printing companies. And she's going to be talking about common mistakes entrepreneurs make. So remember 3D printing. Prodigy. Has anyone heard of Prodigy? Early on in the computer internet era, it was a joint venture of IBM, Sears, and CBS for online shopping. They collectively put $1 billion into that. Today, that concept is Amazon. Sometimes it takes a while. By the way, back then, the only people that used the internet were guys, and guys didn't shop very much. Fashion and other things weren't there. So anyway, and fusion. I mean, there's been a lot of press recently about some breakthroughs in fusion. Unfortunately, the sad issue they had with the person from Brown who shot the MIT professor, he was big in the fusion. Tragic thing. But it's been 70 years and counting for fusion to be an overnight success. So timing becomes important. And I'll talk a little bit more of examples of that. And then finally, people. This is the biggest single source of failure, is people. It's not financing. It's not that the technology doesn't work. It's people. So let me read this quote from Alice in Wonderland. "One day Alice came to the fork in the road and saw a Cheshire cat in a tree. 'Which road do I take?' she asked. 'Where do you want to go?' was his response. Alice answered, 'I don't know,' Alice answered. Then the cat said, 'Then it doesn't matter.' So why do I put that up there? A number of years ago, back when I was practicing law, I had a team come in one day, and this is sort of an example of this happened over and over again. There'd be like three founders, and I would say, what is your vision for the company? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And one of them would usually, the technology person, would say something like, "I want my technology to be a standard in the industry." Oh, that's a good idea. And then the next person, "I think this can be really profitable, but I think we could just run it as a nice, profitable business." Oh, that's a good idea too. Although I'm not sure how that works with the standard thing. We'll come back to that. And the third would say, I want to grow it big and take it public and make a lot of money. And I'm thinking, did these people just meet in the elevator for the first time? Because the first time, to make a decision, are we going to give it away because I want it to be standard? We want to grow fast so we can go public? No, I want to do public. They hadn't really talked. And that was a lesson for you. If we wanted to go and see a Red Sox game, let's say it's a warmer weather. We know where Fenway Park is. We know where we want to go. And if we start over the Longfellow Bridge and all of a sudden we find the road's blocked because of an accident, or in Boston, construction. You know, there are two seasons in Boston, winter and construction. Those are the two seasons. If we encountered that, we'd figure some way to get to Fenway Park because we knew where we were going, right? So really making sure that the people are on board. Here are some other people-related issues. And this happens sometimes when the financing market gets frothy and there's a lot of money out there chasing deals. You can end up building a team before you understand the customer or the market. The example I like to give is, suppose you do a little research and you say, the fans want to watch football. I mean, they had the national championship last night. Everybody's watching and everyone wants to watch football. And you launch the company, you get some money, and you recruit a football team. You got the big linemen, you know, they're 6 foot whatever and 350 pounds. Awesome. But then you find out the fans want to watch basketball. And you know, I'm sorry, these linemen, big and athletic, they're not going to be able to stuff it in the hoop. They're different. It's a different team required, right? And so now you've got these people on board and you're changing the model to something else. And instead of figuring out what's going on in the outside world, we're focused inward. And, you know, what's my job? What's going to happen? How do we do this? All because we didn't understand what the market was before we launched heavily. The other one is not knowing what you don't know. An example out of MIT was E-Ink. E-Ink came out of the Media Lab. They did a great, it was electronic ink. It was the ability to be able to do something on a screen, and black and white at the time. They tried a whole bunch of different things, and I met them and they said, you know, we think it's going to be $15 million to get to market. And I looked at it and I said, oh, I think it's going to be 80 million. I was wrong. It was 160 million at the end. They tried a bunch of things. They finally ended up in the original Kindles, the black and white Kindle devices. But it was very clear from the beginning, they really didn't know what they didn't know. And so I said, good luck. And there's nothing wrong. I mean, they didn't know what they didn't know, and they didn't really seem to want to know what they didn't know. So everybody has a choice. Now, in technology ventures, base ventures, we have a technology, usually a technology person and a business person. And this came out of the 100K when, you know, we would try to put teams together. We'd have somebody with an idea and then the business people. And we started to see teams sort of blow up once they got down the road. And often it was around, how do we split up equity? And so I thought about it and I said, I think this graph maybe illustrates the problem. So on the vertical axis, the y-axis, we have relative importance, and the horizontal or x-axis is time. Now, if I have a technology founder, where at the beginning of the graph, where do you think the technology person is? In the vertical axis. Pretty high, right? If it doesn't work, we don't have anything. Okay? Where's the business person? Relatively not important at that point, right? Because there's nothing, right? And so now we talk about how we're going to split up equity. And the technology person is sitting, it's my idea, I'm working 80 hours a week in the lab, plus, right? You know, I'm invested fully. The business person is interested, maybe has another job, working weekends, but until there's something to do, you know, what's there to do? And this happened to me in one company I was in, where I was one of the co-founders, and I had 2 Sloan people, and we had the scientists were doing their crazy things in the lab, and the 2 business people were, you know, having problems. And I said, you know what we're going to do? Saturday, we're going to go back to Sloan School into a classroom. We're going to sit down and go back to basics. You got to be ready, because this was going to be, if it launched, this was going to be a major thing. You got to be ready thinking about all the things we need to do. Stop complaining about the guys in the lab and do your job. And it was like, and they said, yeah. So the point is, over time, what happens? So for divvying up equity at the beginning point, the technology person, would likely say, well, geez, it's my idea, I'm doing all the work. Maybe I get 95%. You can have 5. What it misses is the fact that over time, the relative importance of technology goes down, and the relative importance of business goes up. And, whether they cross, it doesn't matter. The relative importance changes. And recognizing that and thinking about how do you do a founding team becomes an important thing to think about and have a discussion about, and to think about, and we'll talk about, in the shareholder agreements, things to think about there. Okay, so there are the 4 circles with the sweet point. I'm going to talk about 4 cases that I was involved in various things, and tell you about where they fit. One is a company I would call SpeechCo. It had all 4 components. It went public, and it's now in all your smartphones. This was back at the beginning of voice recognition and natural language processing. DARPA had funded research. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, had funded projects at 5 universities, including MIT, Harvard, Carnegie Mellon, I think Stanford. And they were just beginning to be able to recognize the voice and figuring out. So when you have speech recognition, it's understanding the voice, the accent. A Scottish accent is different than a Southern US accent. What were the words that were spoken, followed by what did they mean? And now we do this all with AI. But it was back in the day. So the idea was big. It was getting funding. The timing was right because the compute power of laptops and others were coming down before this took mainframes, and now they were down to workstations, and it was going clearly in the direction that this could be done on less powerful, less expensive machines. The execution, the technology side was just perfect. Really great technology guy. On the people side, this came out of Victor Zhu's lab at the time. And we obviously were going to need somebody to be on the business side. And I looked around, and there was somebody I knew who had sold his company to Adobe. And he was on when you sell your company, you usually have like a 1-year non-compete. And there might be an earn out where you get extra money and that kind of thing. So I went and I talked to him, and I said, I got this language processing thing. And he thought, that's a pretty good idea. So the 3 of us were essentially the first board. We met for dinner, lunch, whatever, for about a year while he waited for his non-compete. And as soon as the non-compete expired, he joined up, they launched the company. And it took off from there. There were a lot of other hiccups, and if you followed speech recognition, you'll know there's a lot of scandal involved with a Belgian company. But anyway, that was success because of the idea, the timing, the execution, and the people. The second example was also a success. This was a company that was founded out of the 100K competition, a Sloan person and somebody from the Media Lab. And it was about desktop video editing on the Macintosh computer. Interesting idea. At the time, if you wanted to do video editing, you'd have to rent a very expensive video editing studio. Or this company called Avid had been around for a few years, and you could buy expensive video editing equipment. It's $500,000 to $1 million. Avid actually won an Emmy, I think, for technical expertise. So the timing was about right. The execution was a little, I looked at it, was a little weird in my mind at the first because they were so deliberate. I thought, geez, these people are never going to get anywhere. And it came to head with a, let's see, do I have a chalk here? So the original name of the company was Macromedia Business Applications. Whew, what a name. Rolls right off the tongue, right? All right, well, whatever. They get a letter from a company called Macromedia, which was a larger, big company, and said, "You're using our name. We're suing you for, cease and desist." Well, it turned out the company that came out of MIT was actually founded before the Macromedia company technically got there. So in fact, we had the rights to the name. So after a little back and forth, and I explained that to the big company, Macromedia, said, "Okay, well, will you accept $25,000, to change your name?" And I turned to the founders and I said, "25K is a good way to get started. What do you think?" "Yeah, that's great." I said, "What do we need to do?" I said, "You need to change your name." "Okay. So let me know. I'll just file the papers and we'll change the name and I'll give you the check. I'm holding the check." Okay. Week goes by. Call them up. "How are we doing on the name thing?" "Oh yeah, we're working on it." "It's a name, goddamn, change it, Another week goes by. "We're still working on it. Are you guys going to be in on Saturday?" "Of course we're going to be on. I'll come over. Show me what you're doing." And they had the whole whiteboard covered with things. And they picked out, finally they said, "We've got it. And here's the name we're picking." Digital Video Applications. Inc. or whatever. Well, that sounds great. Tells you what you're doing. You're doing digital video and applications. Kind of wordy, but okay. He said, "No, we're going to make it simple. We're going to call it Diva." Hey, that's a great name. Okay, so they go along. There are a lot of stories about Diva. I mean, hilarious company. They had partnered with Ben & Jerry's to test Ben & Jerry ice cream in exchange for getting video beta tests from Diva. So they call me up 2 years later and say, "Joe, we just got an offer to acquire the company." "That's great." And it was for, I don't know, $2 or $3 million at 2 years. That was a lot of money back then. Who's the offer from?" "Oh, that's simple. Avid." You see any resemblance? So at the closing, they gave me a T-shirt that said, "Diva from home, Avid to Hollywood." So the point was they seemed like they were not capable of doing stuff. They were thinking through, what was their positioning, what were they doing, how would they, it was really something quite interesting. So that turned out to be a success. Great stories, huh? Now, one that wasn't so good, HIV Co. This is a company where the co-founders had discovered and held, along with a couple of pharmaceutical companies, the patents on on the glycoprotein on the T cells, GP120 and some other things. They were developing therapeutics for it. The idea was great. The execution, they were very good at what they were doing. The timing worked out well because AIDS was really taking, a lot of publicity, and so there was money there. The execution was really amazing. In addition to what they were doing internally, they had a science advisory board that included Luc Montagnier, who was one of the discoverers of the HIV virus, later got a Nobel Prize, and Robert Gallo, who was in the US, who claimed co-discovery. So in public, these two were butting heads, enough so that Reagan and Chirac, I think, had to come to some agreement on how that would work. But in the science advisory board, they were collegial. So they had a really good thing. The people issue in the team was the problem. The co-founders could not get along. They were backed by a number of very prominent Wall Street types. And I got a call saying the investors want a meeting. So I fly down to New York. In front of the building are all these limos with drivers waiting. And we have all these heavy hitters from Goldman Sachs and others, saying to these guys, you've got to figure out, what's going on. This can't go on anymore. And at one point, one of them stands up and says, if you don't resolve this, you're going to be nuclear. You'll never raise a dime anywhere in the world. So they sort of resolved it, on paper, but they never quite got it along. And the company eventually went public, but it was really not the success. By the way, Anthony Fauci was on the advisory committee. So this is a star-studded thing. So there's an example of people issues. The final is one I call Nano Company. It was one of the first nanotechnology companies. It came out of MIT. It was using quantum chemistry to try to predict material behavior. The first product was a fuel that mixed diesel fuel and water together. Water and oil don't seem to go well. We were running it in unmodified diesel engines and getting emission profiles cleaner than natural gas at a time when people were thinking, how are we going to decrease pollution? We're running it in brand new buses at Logan Airport for tests and in old buses in Costa Rica. So idea, great. The execution, there were some hiccups, not always stories, but essentially okay. The timing was an issue. At the time they were ready to go to market, the price of diesel at the terminal, at the dock, pre-tax was 50 cents a gallon. A bottle of distilled water in the grocery stores was over $1. How were you going to get people to, it was about $2 a gallon where it would have been break even economically. So the timing turned out not to be really good there. And there were also some people issues. This is the one I talked to you about, the lab and the Sloan people. So great potential. Every time I get behind a belching bus with fumes coming out, or I go and I see big, long natural gas powered buses and realize all the money spent to change the infrastructure to be able to support natural gas in a bus. It's one of those things, too bad, but it did fail. So you got to get all these right. And if you do it right, and you make that circle big enough, you get success. I had to do something cheesy, come on. It took me a while to do that too, you'd think. Today I could just say, AI, do this, and I bet you it would do it. Okay, changing topics. One of the ways you get people aligned around what you're doing, be it your team, your investors, the market, is the idea of a mission or vision statement, sometimes known as a value proposition. One way of putting that is C. Blank came up with this, I believe, at Stanford, is one sentence that says, we help X do Y by doing Z. Where X is the target audience, Y is the goal or problem they want to solve, and Z is how you do it. Okay? So for Airbnb, it might be something like, we help travelers, X, find affordable local accommodations, Y, by connecting them with homeowners who have spare rooms, Z. That's sort of a way of talking about what Airbnb does. But the point is, can you distill what you do in an easily deliverable message that gets people aligned around what we're doing? Do we know we're going to the Red Sox game? And this is, now it may change, but that vision statement is important. Now, some of you will have ventures you're thinking about that are two-sided models. And a two-sided model means you have to bring together two parts to make it work. So they're really two distinct customers. So maybe for Uber, it might look like this. The rider, the demand side, we help city residents, that's the X, get from point A to B reliably, that's the Y, by matching them with nearby private driver, Z. Now, you need to think about the driver's side. Let me back that up. Supply side. We help car owners, X, earn flexible income, Y, by connecting them with passengers needing rides. So you've got two sides of a model there. This is classic in like game development for video games. You know, you have to have the platform, but the platform needs applications. Otherwise, who buys the platform? And if back and forth. Now the trick is with this, sometimes you have to figure out what do you focus on first. And I think a lot of the time it's focusing on the demand side of the statement, because that's where you're going to find somebody who's willing to pay for what it is you're doing. Unless, of course, the supply side is the problem. See, the questions are easy, the answers are hard. You know, how do you get drivers? And there are a bunch of other things. But something to think about, coming up with a concise statement about what you're doing that is focused around how you're helping your customer do things. Now that leads to what I call the pyramid, a supported vision. So if you think of a pyramid, at the top is the mission statement that we just talked about, something like that. Underneath that is the elevator pitch, and then maybe an executive summary, and maybe a pitch deck. The reason it's a pyramid is at the top, that mission statement is very short, concise. The elevator pitch is maybe 30 seconds. So if I gave you a mission statement, you might say to me, well, tell me more. That's called an elevator pitch, because the idea is you get in an elevator, there's an investor there, and they say, while they're going up in the elevator, hey, what are you doing? Tell me what you're doing. You got 30 seconds. That's great when the venture capital firm or whatever is on the 40th floor. A little harder when it's on the second floor, but you get the idea. Executive summary might be 2 to 4 pages. And then a pitch deck, Guy Kawasaki talks about it as being 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30-point font. And so that's sort of the pyramid. Underneath that, it's got to be a lot of support. That's why it's a supported vision. There might be a full plan and the components of everything you need to think about down there. The financial projections, we'll be doing that one night. Technology, we won't be talking specifically. We'll talk intellectual property. You got market, customers, sales distribution, and team. And so a really good thing is to have all that together. Now the problem with a lot of technology companies is we're not very good at putting a lot of sizzle on it. You know, we kind of, so, but you do have to make sure that there's support. Otherwise you end up like Elizabeth Holmes. Theranos. Big hype, raised lots of money, brought in lots of people, ended up going to jail because it was false statements, misleading, the whole bit. So you don't want to be that. But you do want the supported vision. And of course, making everybody happy. Now, in the case of Theranos, there's sort of the reality distortion field. So and Steve Jobs tended to do that too. If I can change your perception of reality, then you're going to be happy, right? Not the way I do things, but I wouldn't recommend you do it either. Okay, so for my sort of wrap up, and I have to give credit to somebody in the audience for this. Thank you, Buzz. I'm going to read this. Tell me if I got it wrong. Ivino Kosala invested in a startup that a friend of mine co-founded. My friend asked him for guidance, advice, and Vinod was, and I don't know if he's still in venture capital, but he's one of the leading VCs out there. And I think he was a founder of Sun Microsystem and a few other things. You'll face about a dozen real challenges in developing the technology and venture, which is common for most ventures. 5 of these you will be resourceful enough to find solutions from your background, the field, ecosystem, friends, and colleagues, etc. An additional 5 of these, you and your team will be smart enough to solve yourself. My friend asks, what are the other 2? Well, with these last two, you'd better get darn lucky. So, luck favors the well-prepared, and we hope during this course you will be better prepared to be able to answer the question of how you're going to solve the last two. So with that, we are at the point for team building. We'll meet for 10 or 15 minutes. Do we have the signs up? Where are they? In the hall? Oh, okay. Yeah. So the idea is here, if you have an interest in an area, just go stand around, see if you can talk to somebody. You never know. We'll do maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and I'll talk about course logistics, and then we'll launch into Bob's part. The other thing we did set up, the TAs set up a WhatsApp groups for all of these. So you can join that and carry the discussions offline, and especially for those that are looking remotely, streaming. I think these, you can get all the WhatsApp groups from that Q code, if I did it correctly, QR code. So we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. We'll gather you up, and we'll learn from Bob about customers after that.